Today, I'm going to take you to the stars. Okay, not literally, but I do have something very special for you all today. You're about to watch a video essay that centralizes around a conversation that I recently had with brilliant astrophysicist, Star Trek's scientific advisor, and my dearest friend, Dr. Aaron McDonald, around the damages of the corporatization of space by folks like Elon Musk, and how that is uncritically reflected in the capitalist realism in science fiction stories. And we start off the conversation focused on Apple TV Plus's For All Mankind, a show that we both loved for its initial futuristic look at space, but found ourselves extremely perturbed in recent seasons by its growing aggrandizement of capitalism in space. The conversation as we went along, I think, ended up in a much more profound place and emotional place than we initially intended about why space is so important to inspiring us for the future and why being able to think beyond capitalism in our stories is necessary to inspire change today. Since our conversation got extremely deep and emotional, and that I think it's a great continuation from my recent Starfield video on this channel, I wrote essay sections for this video to build upon, with our conversation being the guide. Before we get into it, I should say there are some spoilers for the show For All Mankind, but ultimately, we're kind of telling you not to watch it, especially after season 2, and we also make sure to give enough context for those of you who have not watched the show to still find a lot to enjoy within the discussion. I think actually we'll get just as much out of it if you haven't seen the show. So with all that preamble said, enjoy the conversation because I think it's really necessary. All right, I'm going to give you, hopefully will be a very nice intro. We'll see. All right. Hello, interwebs. I hope you're all doing well. And for today's video, I want to do something a little bit different and a little bit special because I have a very special guest, someone who you all probably know as the science advisor for the Star Trek franchise, as well as a wonderful voice actor and writer, and also someone who is following in the footsteps of Stephen Hawking himself, being a scientist playing herself in Star Trek Prodigy, but who I am very lucky to call one of my best and closest friends, Dr. Aaron McDonald. And today, we want to discuss something that has been perturbing us about one of our favorite shows, or maybe perhaps ex-favorite shows, the TV series For All Mankind, that is a alt history series that postulates what would happen if the Russians got to the moon first and the space race had continued, thus sort of instigating this whole fast forward of progress for both social change, technological change, all built out of NASA continuing to go to the stars. The show was created by numerous people, but in particular someone that we both look up to, Ronald D. Moore, who was a writer for Star Trek The Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, and one of the main creators of the Battlestar Galactica reimagining before creating For All Mankind. But this started in season 3, and going into season 4, especially with the finale of season 4, there's been this undercurrent throughout the show of capitalism being this instigating force for getting to space, which I know is a very passionate subject for Dr. Aaron, for numerous reasons, both professional, creative, and just looking at the world right now. And so we both had a lot of strong thoughts about it. So I wanted to bring Dr. Aaron on to chat about For All Mankind, the finale, and then also how it relates to sort of ongoing discussions about the corporatization of space with folks like SpaceX, Elon Musk, and things like that. So yeah, I'm excited, Dr. Aaron, to have you. It's wonderful to have you on.
Yay.
Sorry, that was a big long rant.
That's okay.
I know.
It's so funny because we have so many of these conversations, then it's like, oh, yeah, we should probably record this one.
Usually over several beers, and we end up ranting about something or other, and then being like, oh, this is a smart conversation, even while drunk.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I've had a little bit less tequila than I did last night.
Just a little less.
No, I really appreciate you having me on to talk about this, because I think, like you said, the For All Mankind was for me, one of the best sci-fi shows out there that it felt like very few people were watching. And it took me a while to get into it too because of the title. I was like, really, in the year of,
year of our Luigi 2023, we still have a show called For All Mankind.
Exactly. And then everyone was like, you have to watch it, you have to watch it. And then I realized once I started watching it that it really subverted the title. The title was very intentionally misleading in a way because by episode 3, you have women landing on the moon. And it really became a show about how women are a driving force to getting us into space. That like when you open it up to everyone, then space becomes much more accessible when you include our entire society in that. And I loved it.
Throughout seasons 1 and 2, you have Margot, who was the assistant to Werner von Braun, and Werner von Braun, he's sort of kicked out of NASA, getting that Nazi out of there. And they make a whole point about like, yeah, maybe having a Nazi run NASA was a bad idea.
But I never worked there. I had only visited.
The camp was less than half a mile from the factory where you made your rockets. So, how could you not know?
And then, so she gets in charge. You have Danny, who's a black woman, sort of leading the astronaut program. And I'm blanking on her name, but the woman who eventually becomes, spoilers, president in season 3.
Ellen.
Yeah, Ellen, who's a queer woman, Republican, which is, again, part of this whole discussion, too. Women sort of leading the charge in this space.
I think we need someone who's willing to take risks, who can handle the unknown.
Yeah, and that's not even all of them. I mean, like you just listed some of them, but there's a ton of main awesome women in the series. And then the show continues to happen and they start dying or being written off or, and it's gone in a direction where this past season, as I was watching it, I was like, this doesn't feel like it's for me anymore. All the women have kind of been sidelined or maligned or have made questionable choices. Now, I will say, like, big fan of Margot and Sergei. I thought that plot was great. I thought that was a perfect example of how you can become an asset for a foreign nationality. Like, that storyline was great, but she very much got sidelined into a dramatic role instead of her being a great engineer.
And for listeners to give context, Margot was sort of the head of NASA for a while, but then was giving information to the USSR because she had this sort of idealistic belief that like this Russian scientist that she kind of developed feelings for, that they could sort of work together to overcome national boundaries and like actually just focus on the science, which was a bit naive in terms of the geopolitical tensions of a Cold War era show, but it speaks to her idealism. But then it sort of leads her to become a agent for the KGB.
Korzenka is the president. And I have been named the new head of Roscosmos. I need skilled people on my side, and you are very skilled indeed.
But you barely know me.
I've known you for a long time, Margot.
To kind of get to the crux of what I wanted to talk about and what we spoke about after we watched it, was just this show, this season went in a weird direction of we have a colony on Mars for all intents and purposes, and there is a significant working class to it. Like there is a lower decks type environment where people are literally like given worse food. They're basically indentured servants, and it creates this class system on Mars where the US government and the Russian government, the leaders live like the high life, and then everyone who's working for these corporations that have been hired by these governments are living beneath that.
I don't mean to be the squeaky wheel, but I was hired as a fuel tech. A fuel tech who could make bonuses if I hit certain benchmarks. And I came all this way, millions of miles from my family, and I'm a glorified AC repairman making pennies on the dollar.
What's your name, sailor?
Dale, sir, Miles Dale.
Miles. You know where we are right now, yes?
Where we are?
Where we're standing right now.
The airlock.
No, Miles. We're standing on another fucking planet. And this planet, she's trying to kill us every chance she gets. And as much as we help each other here, it does not work unless you take some personal responsibility, Miles.
And we can get into the details of it as we discuss it, but the broad strokes of it that made me so upset this season was because I think the message started to get really muddled of like who are on the side of the workers.
Yes. Oh gosh, yes.
And it became, Ed, this incredibly privileged white man, has a personal grudge against a Black woman who's been brought on to run the thing.
You have been commanding missions, flying missions, while concealing a potentially serious health condition. All because what? You just couldn't let go.
I know my body. I know what works for it. I'm fine.
That is not your call to make, and you know that.
And so he goes down to the working class and basically riles up a class revolution.
Send a message to those pricks down on Earth that if they want that precious asteroid, they gotta pay the people who do all the dirty work.
And if that doesn't work?
Well, then we shut this place down.
Yes. Yes.
And gets the corporation involved such that I got the message that government is bad and the true saviors of the working class is capitalism.
Yeah. But like Ed is this guy who has always had this sort of sense of entitlement throughout all of the seasons. And a lot of the show has been like breaking down his entitlement and like forcing him to reckon with it. But he always like ends up on top. And the show always has this like sympathetic, but he's just a good guy deep down sort of thing to it, where it's like season 3, he gets kicked out of NASA because he's can't get past his own ego. And so then he goes to Dev, the capitalist man, who's a Black man who's the CEO of a SpaceX style company. They sort of work together to sort of get to Mars first before the American and USSR governments. And now this season, he's in charge of the Mars base. But he then, again, his own entitlement causes him to cause some problems. And so they bring on Danny, who then has to deal with this class dispute that he riles up because the show makes it very clear, like he has lingering internal resentments against her being a Black woman.
Damn fine astronaut. Nobody's disputing that, but if this were a level playing field, I'd be commanding this mission, and you know it.
I don't even know what to say. I've heard crap like that my whole life. But I never thought I'd hear it from you.
And so, yeah, he does rile this up. And then Dev comes in and says, like, this is not the right time for this strike. That we have other more important things to do. And he sort of like stops it cold.
Unless we resolve this today, right now, and get that fuel plant repaired and pumping liquid argon so we can capture the most valuable known object in our solar system, then we failed, all of us.
Okay, so then give us what we're asking for.
Look, I wish I could tell you that we're a possibility, but the truth is, the nations of Earth will never, never send this asteroid to Mars. You know why? Because it's not in their financial interest. And space is a business. It's about resources, it's about the bottom line, it's about profit.
Fuck your profit.
You know, go ahead and scoff all you want to, but I mean, that's what this strike is all about, isn't it? You want your cut, your slice of the pie. You came here to make a living. But what you're asking, changing the destination of this asteroid, that is never going to happen. But I'm gonna tell you what can happen. NASA and Roscosmos have agreed to your workplace safety concerns.
But then, like, he works with them surreptitiously to go around the U.S. government to bring this asteroid that is full of minerals to Mars in order to give Mars, and thereby him as the guy who has like a high investment in Mars, the like more chance to create trade and bring more economy to Mars, and thus him. But the saying like that'll be good for the working class as well, because like it'll benefit both of us. The literal like trickle down economics.
But the strike, for all its inconveniences, it wound up being a blessing. Because a few of you showed just how much you believe in your cause. How much that you would sacrifice for something greater than yourselves. We're gonna need as much of that as we can get.
What the fuck are you talking about?
I'm talking about the future, Ed. About taking what is rightfully ours.
There's this underscoring, like Reaganomics underscore to the whole show.
That's exactly right. And the whole time I was sticking with it, hoping for some reckoning and some critical attitude of like what Ed's motivation is purely privilege and personal, and he's using these people who have so much to lose for his own vendetta. And there was no criticism of that. There was no comeuppance. There was no lesson learned by any means.
No.
And we were supposed to walk away being like, oh, he thinks Mars is his home now.
Oh, yeah, this is his real place, and he's working for the betterment of it.
날개 없는 말이 천리로 간다오. 이것이 내 집이에요. 나도 마찬가지라.
What frustrated me with his story was like in the final episode, there's that scene where the U.S. government goes and raids the like Korean government's spot that they have on there, and it causes this riot. And then Danny goes down and she's like, oh my God, this has gotten out of control. And this is like the definition of the glass cliff, which is the idea where women are brought into failing companies or organizations to lead them when the male CEO or leader of that company has caused it to fall into disarray. And so that when the company inevitably fails, it can then be blamed on the woman and not the man. And Elon Musk is quite literally doing this right now after ruining Twitter, now X, and putting Linda Yaccarino in charge as X continues to fall into a right-wing outrage site and its inevitable irrelevance.
Elon is working on accelerating the rebrand and working on the future. And I'm responsible for the rest, running the company. From partnerships to legal to sales to finance, all the things.
And you have autonomy in doing that?
Yes, I have autonomy in doing that.
And this is kind of the same thing that Danny for All Mankind goes through when she is brought into Ed's mess and made to deal with it, that the show never presents critically.
You're basically setting her up to fail.
Exactly. Yeah. And like, it's the same thing. And she's set up to fail. And like this riot's happening on her hands. She goes down to try and stop it along with Ed. And she like just gets randomly shot. You know, I'm not personally offended because I'm not a black person, but it's like we have this black woman that we're just going to like just shoot, just traumatize, so that we have a scene where Ed can be like, no, you're going to make it out okay. So like he looks like the good guy after having all this lingering resentment towards her. It's like he does actually care about her.
You're gonna be fine. You got it.
And then she doesn't die. So it's like this cheap drama that's like just done for Ed's storyline. So it's like, we're going to harm a black woman in order to prop up and make a man's story look good.
Yep. Horrible. and oh God, there's just so much, Jessie.
I know.
Much. Yeah, like if I had to summarize this season, it was Elon Musk's wet dream. Like this idea of coming, and I'm so sorry for that image, but it's the best way I can describe it, because it's like the idea that this corporation is not really bad, and the true passion is just to get humans on Mars and separate themselves from these evil governments that are never going to be on anyone's side, and that they can come in and, just like you said, trickle down economics, the situation, and capitalism saves the day. And they're really the ones that are on the side of the working class. And now we're living on Mars independent is kind of the implication that they gave from Earth. And I'm just like, it was so done without any criticism about the implications of that. I mean, maybe we'll see, but I gotta say, like, this season did not give me hopes for that.
Yeah, I mean, this is the argument that I've seen, because I posted about this on Elon Musk's platform yesterday. And one criticism that I saw come up, that Ronald D. Moore has stated that For All Mankind was conceptualized as a type of prequel to the post-capitalist society that we see in Star Trek. And perhaps they're setting up for later seasons that capitalism will eventually be done away with as unnecessary.
The sweep of the series is saying, if we had really gone all in on the space program and moved more aggressively to the moon and to the beyond, how would things have changed? Technological change happens faster in the United States. Societal change happens faster in the United States. And the idea is that this is a show that posits an alternate history that's better than ours, that turned out well, that it became a better country, a better world, a better future for humanity. And it became, it's a more positive idea of what the future could be than what we had. And it's ultimately, this is like the road that leads you to a future like Star Trek, where it is an optimistic idea of what's possible, where technology is our friend, where we did, go out into the planets and explore the solar system and created a better world because of the breakthroughs that the space program inspired and some of the literal breakthroughs that this program itself discovered.
But even if that ends up being the ultimate statement of the show, it still presents this thing where capitalism was an almost necessary evil driving force to get us here. Like, we needed the capitalists to fund these things in order to get us to space. We needed Elon Musk's SpaceX to be able to get us into outer space. When in reality, like, people like Elon Musk, and you can speak more to this specifically, but like people like Elon Musk are actually what's like keeping us from being able to push into space further.
Yeah, because I think there's a lot of problems with what's going on in the space industry right now. And NASA has always been underfunded. It is flawed. The government is not great, but NASA has always had a lot of ideals. It's just not had a lot of funding.
Mm-hmm.
And it's required to reach out to companies and contract companies to build stuff for them. And I'm not going to underplay the technological advances that like SpaceX has made. It's not him. It's the people who work at that company who have pushed and worked hard and been worked to the bone. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I live like I live 5 miles from their
Mm-hmm.
headquarters here in Southern California. And the attitude is they hire young people, work them to death almost,
Mm-hmm.
and then they get rid of them and bring more people in at an entry level. And a lot of this is because of that image that the company has. So I'm going to make 2 arguments here. One is about going to space and one is about getting people to work in the space industry.
Yeah.
The image of that company and to some extent all these other corporations that are looking at trying to make space more available to people it's starting to really turn off a lot of underrepresented groups because they have now become the face of space exploration. And there's a lot of underrepresented minorities who look at that and say, I do not belong in that environment. Like, that is not an environment. I don't want to work for that guy. I don't want to work. And if he's running this industry, then it's clearly not for me. And we're starting to see, I mean, I work with like middle school students and high school students, and like the lack of interest from women and non-cisgender men to be a part of the space industry is real. Like, I'm doing a thing like this week, and they said we have however many dozens of girls signed up for this. No one was interested in doing space. They're all interested in STEM, but none of them are interested in space.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that has to do with the image of the space industry right now. And like, that's a huge problem. And that's a big problem that we need to reconcile, because that is such a tiny part of the industry. And when you're in the industry, they're also pretty blind. It's a crappy company to work for.
Yeah.
And they take way too many risks than people who are comfortable. Like, okay, now it's a good transition to the actual practical undermining of space travel that this company is doing, in that, when the Challenger accident happened, that set back space exploration probably decades. At least we can say, funding and enthusiasm for NASA just bottomed out. It was seen as too scary, too risky. It was so traumatizing to watch that live that people were just like, nope, no, let's stop. This is not worth these people dying in such a visible way. And we're running that risk with some of the risks that this company is taking, that the same thing is going to happen, because they're not, they're living fast and breaking things, and you can't do that with human lives. And I'm sorry, with my experience, I can tell you they're not taking the appropriate safety protocols that I feel comfortable taking.
Well, even in just the building of it, because like 2 things that I want to jump off of what you just said, like we stopped space programs for like a long time because several people died.
Grissom, White, and Chaffee were a shocking wake-up call that caused many to question President Kennedy's deadline to put a man on the moon. The investigation of the Apollo 1 fire forced a hold on the space program. The hard lessons learned from this mission would dictate new stringent checks and balances that would inform all NASA missions to follow, ultimately changing the nation's path to the moon.
It was like just a handful of people. And that's, again, not to undercut their death. It's a good thing that we stopped to make sure that we are more safe. But then you look at Elon Musk and like even just focusing on the safety precautions for people going into space, it's non-existent. But you look at like how he forced people to work during COVID and wanting to get like the workers to come in and put their lives in danger to just make these things. And so capitalists don't have the working class in mind. They want to run them to the bone in order to like literally to the death to be able to get to space. And to bring it back to For All Mankind, Dev is clearly modeled after Elon Musk with like his rallying speeches that he gives like Elon Musk.
Fly too close to the sun, it's make better fucking wings. The best way to seize the future is to invent it.
Step one for Musk is to rally employees around a lofty company mission. It's exactly what inspired Carl Medlock to join Tesla in 2009.
We were all so excited about the brand. I mean, we're all working 80, 100 hours a week. We kind of lost track of our families, our passions, our hobbies, and all that stuff, but we loved what we were doing.
And the show showcases him as being this guy who endangers the working class folks out of his ignorance, like the woman who almost dies in the finale for his plan, but like still ultimately, even if accidentally out of self-interest, he helps the working class by his success trickling down to them, which isn't accurate to real life with Elon Musk. And we can even see this feeling being echoed by creatives on the show, such as Joel Kinnaman, who plays Ed, saying in a post-season 4 interview in response to a question about what could fix the disappointing lack of progress in our world compared to the alternate history of For All Mankind, "I think it would be great if Elon Musk just forgot about X and just focused on SpaceX. It'll do a lot more good." Here, he's implying that there's a pervading belief that Elon Musk's capitalist goals are ultimately a good that pushes us forward that we need more of, not less, underscoring the ethos of a positive force of capitalism seen in For All Mankind. Your discussion of like girls not being inspired to go into space, it's so frustrating because I think for both of us, like growing up on Star Trek, and I know Captain Janeway was like a big inspiration for you, seeing a woman like a scientist captain in space. And for me, like Star Trek generally, and Jessie Dex also being a scientist, like inspired like by what space can show us, and like looking at the stars and being like, what's out there that's different than us? What can we discover? What's new about the universe? And then we have things like For All Mankind, or I just did a video on Starfield that like I literally made for you. I mean, that video with like you in mind as the audience about like how that game is just basically capitalist realism, like our limited imagination. Like it's supposed to be this space game, you can go anywhere, but all it is just showing a corporatized view of the world that I would recommend people check out if you want to see more of my views on that game. But it goes to like how so much of our stories of space in our fictions is what inspires things like scientific development, going back to like the 1960s. So much technological development came out of people who were inspired by Star Trek. Like we don't have that right now, especially for marginalized people. And then you look at For All Mankind and it says, you know, women get pushed to the side. These entitled men are centered. The capitalists have your back even when they don't. It's a really just depressing view on this thing that should be so hopeful.
And I do think like this feeling is pervasive right now. If I can be so bold as to plug like another YouTube channel that I watch, I think she put it really well. On Outside Xbox, they were talking about games that they wish they loved. And Jane on that channel, she shared exactly the same sentiments that we're feeling right now, where she's like, I am disillusioned with space travel. I feel like it's not for me. I feel like capitalism is destroying space. And she even shouted out Star Trek as like, this is something that I have wanted to work towards and be a part of as like a human species my whole life. And it just feels gross and dark now. And Starfield for her only continued that it was like, oh, this is like a capitalist hellhole.
You know, I have a long history of conversations with people who are like, why should we be spending all this money? And it is a fabulously expensive, dangerous, and difficult project to go to space. And I would have said then, like, it is so definitively human. You know, it is part of what makes us who we are, that we aspire to explore and that we aspire to learn. In more recent years, though, we have seen the commercialization of space by billionaires who making a real mess of it, if I'd say so myself. And I think it makes it harder for a Star Trek nerd like myself to be like, space is a noble and selfless goal, when actually I think what we're looking at is the aspiration to like industrialize and commercialize space travel, space exploration. I feel like there was probably at some level in the making of that game, it was fueled by that enthusiasm for space. But in the moment to moment, like, expression of that vision in Starfield, I don't really feel it.
And I mean, even shows that I love, like The Expanse, which like Expanse, I feel like ultimately does have like a hopeful view on things, but it's a little bit more couched in pragmatism or couched in cynicism. It still doesn't necessarily showcase this like inspiring, hopeful view of things. Like it has, I think, a hopeful viewpoint, but it doesn't. And so it just speaks to like, where is that hopeful view of space now?
Well, and we need to talk too about like the broad message of privilege that's being sent out here, like both from the companies and just from the character of Ed. But I think from the company's perspective, and how we see that reflected is SpaceX can basically launch whatever it wants now. It owns a launch pad and it owns the launch vehicles. Because in the past, it always had to be these negotiations between companies, and like basically NASA or like the DoD for the United States would be coordinating all of this across different companies, and the government would still ultimately be the decision maker for this. But now you have a company that owns its own launch vehicles, owns its own launch pad, and is launching its own satellites. And it's been clearly documented that it is inhibiting astronomical research. Like, we literally can't get good images of the stars from the ground now because of these satellites that were put up with no coordination or plan. And they go up there in a different orbit than what people were told. It has higher reflectivity than what people were told. And it's ruining the night sky. And we have this, the even darker vision, which is kind of the space I'm living in right now. There's this thing called the Kessler syndrome, which basically says like you eventually put so much crap up into space that you have a collision happen, which we're starting to see more collisions happening right now. And you have debris from that. And the Kessler syndrome is when you have so much junk up there that debris causes a cascade effect that basically just your entire low Earth orbit is now just debris. And you literally cannot launch off of the surface anymore. And that is the darkest timeline for space travel, that like all of these grand visions that these companies are trying to give, they could be shooting us in the foot with that. It's like we literally cannot achieve that. And so it's just this privilege and short-term thinking. And that's where like what made me start to see red in this season was the privilege of Ed to have a medical condition, not disclose it, and grow his own pot on Mars. Using resources like
Wayne, he gave me some seeds to help me with my aches and pains. And I planted the suckers and they just took off.
There's so many layers of problems with that. And like, yeah, weed should be legal, whatever. I don't disagree with that. But when you're clandestinely undermining and utilizing resources for your own personal gain and to show off, be like, isn't this a sweet pot farm? And then be upset when you get fired, like the idea that his trajectory was basically like, I don't want to tell anyone that I have this injury because I don't want to be kicked off of Mars because I love it here. Great, Ed, good job. Happy for you. Start growing your own weed, smoking pot, not telling anyone, get fired for that, get so upset about that you now rile up a working class who can't afford to live into a class revolution, and then be like, sorry you got shot, Danny. Like, but now I get to live on Mars and I won.
That's the thing with me, is like, it's fine. It is fine for me for the show to showcase, like the show actually, I think, showcases his entitlement really, really well. And I think that that's fine to show this like entitlement of these dudes who are basically like, well, I've dealt with shit too. You shouldn't be complaining so much, without realizing that like privilege is not this extra thing, is like the absence of having to deal with extra bullshit. Like, you have the privilege of not having to deal with like the bullshit that like women have to deal with, or black folks have to deal with, black women have to deal with, or queer folks, or anything like that. But the show consistently shows really well. But then it always ends on the note of like, but he's learning and he's doing his best, and he'll get there in the end, and he's still not going to face any like long-term repercussions for his actions. Yeah. And will actually generally come out on top.
I could not believe when he used his grandchild to like sneak through the vent system. I was like, are you actually kidding me? Like, and it's felt like they were setting him up to really take a big fall with this. That no,
nothing.
It's fine. Yeah. All of this behavior was ultimately fine. He got what he wanted.
It also should be mentioned that For All Mankind has this very 1960s, 70s, and Reagan-era Red Scare-style propaganda in it, using the villain of the USSR as this horrific, scary place that then frames the US as the clearly better righteous system in contrast, and then uses that to frame all communistic, socialistic, or anarchistic ideals, which it all lumps together as the same, by the way, as then dangerous or evil, while actively ignoring that, well, yes, the USSR was a terrible place, it wasn't actually communist, nor more importantly, is the United States' system much better? I mean, to make a direct comparison, the US prison system, which is currently the largest in the world and one of the cruelest in the world that also disproportionately traps minorities within it, is much worse just based on sheer scale than the still horrific prison system of the USSR. And For All Mankind displays this exact type of propaganda uncritically as it constantly shows, especially this season, the USSR as this evil place that is then contrasted by the positive, hopeful force of capitalism in the US that, yes, has flaws, but will be what ultimately propels us to the future.
The 21st century, the beginning of a new era, and none of it would have been possible without all of you. The sacrifice, the amazing work you've done here, every single one of you.
And the other thing too that I want to talk about that, like, I'm also gonna shout out another YouTuber who can speak to this in more depth, but I think it's really pertinent to this discussion as well, is that like there's a podcast that they used to do. They didn't do it for the season, I'm assuming because of the actor strike that was going on when the show started. But they used to do a podcast, companion podcast for the show, hosted by the woman who plays Danny, the actress who plays Danny, and one of the like talking points that I had her discuss on the podcast for season 3 was about the character of Dev, about being like, oh, because it's an alternate history and because things are moving along faster and progress is faster in terms of social change, isn't it great that we now see a black man, the character of Dev, as a capitalist?
Eddie, in my conversation with Ron, I was talking to him about what the archetype of a capitalist billionaire space explorer looks like, which usually looks like over 50, white, bald, male, you name it. And I asked him, Ron, what up with that? Why didn't you find some guy that looks like that? And he said, what I love about our alternate history timeline is that there's so many things that have accelerated that now the face of a billionaire looks different.
Entry of private enterprise into space exploration felt like it had to happen in the sort of version in our alternate history, and that it would happen just like it's happening in our world. And then it was a question of who represents that. And we thought it was an interesting choice to not just make it another middle-aged white guy that the audience was so familiar with. Let's make somebody different and somebody that also represents the worldview of For All Mankind's alternate history, where diversity had blossomed a little earlier and that things were moving more firmly down that path. So it felt like, for all those reasons, that was the choice that we made.
I love that choice.
This idea of, oh, look, our progress is seeing marginalized people in like oppressor positions. And I want to shout out FD Signifier, who's one of the like fantastic video essayists, who's talked more in depth about like this idea that's put into society of like black men should just try and get ahead and like get ahead in the economy, and that's how they uplift the black community.
I feel like I need to dispel the myth that being a socialist or leftist is about taking a vow of poverty and being anti-money. That's the propaganda they give people about this concept. I want to resist the temptation to attach social progress to consumption or branding or influencer culture, or that one or a few black people getting money is somehow revolutionary, and more specifically to kill this idea that black commerce and business is the key to black liberation. The fact that a few black people are doing well is dope. But no matter what Jay-Z tells you, another black billionaire is not going to move the needle for black people as a whole. Black people do not have the economic wealth to begin to ever make a dent in the wealth disparity to the point of promoting social change at a wide scale. This doesn't mean you shouldn't support black businesses and seek ways to contribute to the economic well-being of black people. But it does mean that we have to be more critical, or better yet, suspicious of anyone who promotes their business as some form of community project, or more importantly, give passes to rich Black folks for anti-Black and problematic behavior just because they're getting lots of money and sprinkling the appendix of it back to the community.
And like, there's a similar idea in the queer community that the show showcases too, of like, look, we got a queer woman as president, but she's also a Republican. And
President Wilson hailed it as a miracle fuel that will save us from global warming. But it is the blue-collar workers, the coal miners, the oil workers, who are now bearing the price for this progress.
She has a similar story to Clinton in that, like, there's a scandal around her, but around her and her, like, beard gay husband.
And also an astronaut comes out as gay.
And it, like, causes Don't Ask, Don't Tell to happen earlier.
Served his country with distinction and honor. But his actions are a violation of current Department of Defense regulations, and he will be discharged from the Army upon his return.
And her coming out as queer sort of pushes queer acceptance earlier.
But I can stop lying to you right here, right now, and give you the simple truth. I'm gay. And I have been since the day I was born.
And it, like, again, plays this, like, Don't Ask, Don't Tell is this necessary thing that we had to get through in order to get to the real change. Like, their imagination is just, this stuff happens earlier to get to where we are now, rather than, like, this stuff happens completely differently because space teaches us something new and has tokenistic sort of like girl boss style feminism that just says, like, look, we have a girl president now. Isn't that, like, meaningful change rather than the system itself changing?
Even all of that was thrown away this season.
Mm-hmm.
Danny was basically ineffectual. She was brought in as a leader, and they were doing stuff without her knowledge. She's being undermined by Ed. Like, she never got a good moment to show what a good leader she was.
Mm-hmm.
Ellen has disappeared, been written off the show. Fine. No worries. That was our president. Gay president. She solved gayness, so she's done. And we have Margot, who I think was the most interesting plot of this season, but still at the end, she's carried off in handcuffs. And Aleda at the very end, with no motivation whatsoever, was like, I'm here for this. Screw the government. Pro-capitalism. And I'm like, what? Where and how? And so, like you said, the conceit of the show is basically saying, oh no, we're just going to do all of this crap faster. And oh, by the way, now all the men are still in charge.
Yep.
We no longer have a female head of NASA. We no longer have these lead engineers. They've all taken the other side. Now it's just straight up Dev and Ed and the guy from Home Alone running things.
Yeah.
That's it. And Al Gore's president. And
we did it, folks. Yeah, that was the win.
The men are back in charge, and capitalism and trickle down economics win. If I can just take a second, like, I was literally, I might get emotional talking about this, but like, I was devastated by the end of this season. Like, I was devastated. A huge cloud just descended on me watching this final episode and realizing the story points that they were making and the argument that the show was eventually making. Like, I just felt like space isn't for me anymore. None of the work we do matters. It's all just going to end up the same. It's all going to end up the same. The capitalists win. All the men are in charge. And that's it. And that's where we end up. And for a show that started out being so hopeful for me and so inspiring with so many badass women in it, to then turn around and have them be traitors, have them be pro-capitalist, and have them be ineffectual, crappy leaders who only serve the stories of the men.
Mm-hmm.
I was literally devastated. The episode ended, and my partner, who like hasn't watched the show, he just comes in for the really cool space events that happen. I'm like, something cool is about to happen. He heard the end of the show happen, and there was just silence, and he could see the TV, but he can't see me. And he was like, are you okay? And I was like, I can't even talk. Like, it was like this. Like, I was so racked with disillusionment and anger and just a cloud of depression for the future of space. Like, I just, I think they really put me in my place and reminded me that I don't belong. And that's it.
Which is absolute bullshit, because you're the fucking person leading the way in like so much of this stuff. So like to try, I mean, it's number one, thank you for sharing that. Like,
sorry, I got
no, do not apologize for that. That's totally cool. I'm just thanking you for sharing that. But like the truth of it is that all of this stuff just showcases such a limited imagination from people like, I mean, just to put it on him, and it's not just him, but like Ronald D. Moore, like, who back in the 80s when he worked on Next Generation and even Deep Space Nine, even more so, was like this person like pushing these things that like inspired people to see the future and had that imagination at that time to think beyond the Reaganomics of that era. Like Deep Space Nine especially was like this one that like showcased we can exist out here, and we are actually the ones that push this forward, and we are the ones that actually, despite understanding how this system is flawed, like how the Federation, like we are not Enterprise, we are not Picard and these people that run like get all the accolades as like the heroes. I told you yesterday, it's like it speaks a lot that the fact that like Ronald Reagan visited the set of Next Generation, but like in many ways, despite the ones suffering under the system, suffering the trauma of Wolf 339, suffering from being pushed on the station or whatever, we're the ones that end up saving the entire thing because we believe in the ideals of what this thing is supposed to be about more. In many ways, because we have to endure the hardships and hold true to these ideals that we don't actually, that the system doesn't always like hold itself to or actually uplift.
I also have this theory where I'm wondering if For All Mankind kind of speaks to Ronald D. Moore's disillusionment as a writer with being able to show a better future, because he started his career on Next Generation and Deep Space Nine, shows that displayed a flawed yet ultimately hopeful view of the future that moved beyond capitalism. But after briefly working on Star Trek Voyager, he left the franchise burnt out and disillusioned, specifically because of the more capitalistic, unchanging mindset of producers like Rick Berman, who saw Star Trek as a product, not a futuristic story. And then from there, he goes on to create Battlestar Galactica, which I love, but is this very cynical look at a post-9/11 America, as well as the concept of Star Trek Voyager as this ship cut off from the Federation that still ultimately upholds Federation's values in a positive way. And Galactica, I think, is much better written than Star Trek Voyager, but it does sort of center around this very dark viewpoint of human beings cut off from our luxuries or society are ultimately going to be greedy, self-centered people, when in reality, studies show that human beings usually form societies of caring and community. And it's actually only when we create systems that incentivize individualism like capitalism that we ultimately push away others to focus only on ourselves. And then from there, For All Mankind feels like this response to the prequel series Star Trek Enterprise, which was a show whose original concept under Brannon Braga, before it became The Next Generation Light due to Rick Berman, was very similar to For All Mankind in that it was going to stay mostly on Earth and showing humans progressing to the stars by bettering themselves first. But more than likely, Enterprise was never going to show that like capitalism was a necessary evil, because Star Trek has always been very critical of capitalism. But For All Mankind, under Ronald D. Moore, does say that it is a necessary evil, which isn't actually accurate to the truth that capitalism is a hindrance to ethical, scientific, and humanistic progress.
People up there, they don't care about Mars. They just care about themselves.
Maybe. But if they succeed, the NASA, Roscosmos, and the M7 have no choice but to continue investing in Happy Valley. In the future of the space program. We can't let them throw away everything we've built.
Are you saying what I think you're saying?
Progress is never free.
And it's even sadder that there's a quick mention that only 3 Star Trek series exist in For All Mankind.
I know you hate Star Trek, but you better get used to it, because I'm gonna make sure that my grandbaby is a full-blown Trekkie. That's right. We're gonna watch all the series, all 3 of them, and the Twilight Zone.
And apparently, according to an interview with Ronald D. Moore, it's Star Trek, the original series, Phase 2, and The Next Generation, and Deep Space Nine actually doesn't exist in his universe. And it kind of just showcases this looking down on this show that was so radical in its expression of showcasing marginalized people being centered in this hopeful future, a show that he himself was like central to working on. It feels very nihilistic about his own work. And then we get to today, and I think this is me being my own radical self, being like, the system as it is failing so many people because it is just handing everything over in sort of a Reaganomics neoliberalist sort of way to capitalists who are just in it for themselves, in it for their own egos, in it to venerate themselves and think, like Elon Musk keeps citing Star Trek as this thing that he loves, but it's clear he wants to just create like The Expanse or For All Mankind. And it just speaks this limited imagination to be like, what can we imagine beyond this system of individual aggrandizement? That we need to start imagining our future beyond capitalist realism, like seen in For All Mankind or Starfield, or even, and I say this as someone who loves that stuff, cyberpunk media that imagines a capitalist dystopia, and actually have stories that showcase radically hopeful futures that imagine new systems and ways of thinking about the future. Maybe this is me being a writer, aggrandizing stories, but to me, stories are what inspire revolutions, be they political, technological, or social. I mean, look at all the societal advancements that we got from the original Star Trek by scientists who were inspired by that show. Like things like the cellular phone came directly from Star Trek. But those revolutions are inspired by stories showing us something different, a way the world can change, rather than cynically showing us a view of the way the world is now, or that it can't change. And to bring it back, to give you some hope, like, I hope, like, there are people who, like you, who are leading that charge, and who are actually showcasing like how we can think differently about these spaces. Like even just in terms of the stories we tell, like you are we made a movie together and you were the instigating force to make that. I'm not trying to aggrandize like, oh, look at our movie, but like you were the instigating force to me to like want to write that. And sorry, I might get emotional. Like I remember when we were at Star Trek Mission Chicago together. And you told me like make things with the people that you care about, not your heroes or whatever. Make things with the people that like you want to work with who are on your level. And that's what inspired me to be like finally like go and write the film that I wrote, because it was an idea that I had for so long. And like it's like I wrote it and we worked on it, we made a thing that hopefully will be good. We'll see what it ends up being. But that's what inspires people. You are inspiring people. And yes, like there is this collective cynicism at the moment that I think we're all feeling, and it's hard to hold on to that hope. Believe me, I know that. The message we constantly need to send is like, there is hope in the future because human beings deep down are not cynical and out for themselves. We are people who care about each other. We want to build these systems of caring and community. And it just sucks that like right now, the seeming people who are winning are these capitalists, but it will have to reach a point where it all collapses. We're seeing it happen at the moment with so many strikes and everything like that.
Yeah.
And all of this stuff, like For All Mankind, just limited imagination on the ability to think beyond the ways the system has taught us to think. And I think we're starting to see that happen more and more. And you very much in so many ways, both as a scientist, both as a creative, both as someone who uplifts other creatives, are doing that. And I want you to know that because you inspired me. And I know so many others as well. Like you give so many great Star Trek prodigy talks about like the science of Star Trek and everything. And I know kids watch that and really love it. So you have inspired many.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. I think it's, a lot of work in the space, what you do and what I do, and so many people who work in like diversity and inclusion initiatives are just give so much free time and so much mental and emotional energy toward it. Because we have that vision, we have those things that drive us. And sometimes it breaks us, and I think for me, if there's any Parks and Rec fans out there, I've always identified with Leslie Knope. She is absolutely someone like of any fictional character. I wish I was more like Janeway. I wish I was more like Dana Scully. I'm really like Leslie Knope. Yeah. And there's like that arc where she gets in government and realizes how flawed it is, and she just gives up. And like she's got her feet on the desk with some Uggs on, drinking a gallon-sized soda, and it's like, and in a t-shirt, and it's like I just relate so hard to that image right now because it is like what's the point? What's the point? And so I think continuing to like share stories and tell stories, and hopefully, you know, by making our films, and that memory is so embedded in my mind as well, but you know, talking about how, especially in the entertainment industry, the best advice I got was like, don't join the entertainment industry to work with your heroes. Meet your peers and then become the heroes. And that's where like I feel so passionate about it. But you're just constantly up against that wall of not being in the majority, not having your voice heard, not being the first one people think of because they want to call and work with their buddies. But when you are in a field where that is the case, and it's not just entertainment, if you're passionate about it, that keeps you going. And that's what keeps me from giving up entirely. We have good days and bad days, but you know, being able to work with you and tell these stories and write these stories, I think hopefully we'll get to be the ones to write the next For All Mankind.
And actually write it well.
and tell a story of hope. And not of trickle down Reaganomics.
It'll save us all. It'll save us all. To kind of put a button on this conversation, just know that you are deeply appreciated and you have inspired so many people. You've inspired me, and we made things together that hopefully will inspire others. You know, again, who knows, but hopefully will. And we are working towards creating new systems and new stories, new ways of having hope about the future. And it just speaks to like that's what's needed right now. And people who want to push these sort of boomer propaganda pieces, Gen X propaganda pieces of like, you know, capitalism is the way to go. You gotta have the free market, let it go, or just put limits on capitalism or whatever. That nonsense will be pushed the wayside at certain points. But also, two, it's okay to be disillusioned at times. It's okay to feel like this is shit. I've been there. I've had many a cry over the past few years of like, why do I even do this? Why am I even trying? I think we've had those cries together sometimes. So like it's okay to feel that way, but we keep pushing forward.
I think, you know, it's not, we just have to remind ourselves that it's not inevitable. The capitalism future is not like the fighting against it is not futile. And this show tried to tell me it was futile. And right now it succeeded. Like you said, having the opportunity to talk to you about this, to share this opinion and this perspective with people, I hope resonates. You know, if people out there really liked the ending, good. You're winning right now. But it isn't inevitable, and I think that's the hope that Star Trek has shown us. So thank you for having me to talk about this and share my views.
Yeah, of course. Well, I adore you. Also, promote yourself. Please, before we go, share where people can find you and what you're doing and all those things.
Okay, I'm on Blue Sky and Instagram at Dr. Erin Mac, DRERNMAC. And I also have a YouTube channel that has like not, because time is non-existent. It's been like 3 years since I last posted something.
I wonder what you've been doing in those 3 years, like working on this major franchise. You know, I don't know what it could be.
But I will say, thanks to the fans and to everyone who's just been like, man, I really wish I could see more of these talks online. My YouTube channel is coming back and there are videos in the pipeline. I promise you this time, once they start coming, they're not going to stop. So keep an eye out. It's called Dr. Erin Explains the Universe. You can find that YouTube channel.
I'll put in the link below. So check it out. Yeah.
And I have a Star Trek baby board book, Star Trek, My First Book of Space, which is for all ages and Star Trek fans. And I have a Audible original called The Science of Sci-Fi that gets into the science of gravity, Newtonian and Einstein, and then how we see it in science fiction. And I also wrote some Star Trek Adventures modules called The Dangers of Space. So you can check out those mission briefs as well. And yeah, I mean, thank you. I hope people continue to watch Star Trek. I think we're in a great era. You know, we'll look back on these great episodes of Star Trek that are coming out. Watch Star Trek Prodigy.
Yes.
Binge it.
Yes, especially for a certain character that shows up in the season 1 finale. They look very familiar. Yes, agreed. Also, I should say, please consider subscribing to my channel. And also, if you can, please consider supporting me over on Patreon. It's been a little tight with money lately, given just a lot of stuff that's been going on with bills in my own personal life. And if you like any of my content or what I do, please consider helping to support me over there, as well as helping me be able to pay my collaborators who work on videos like this. All right. Well, everybody, love y'all. Sorry that this one got a little depressing at space, but again, remember there's hope, and live long and prosper, everyone.